Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I'm Ambrosia Carey. I'm the founder of Successful Stylist Academy podcast and business. And today we're actually going to be talking about finances. I know, super sexy, but trust me, I think we're going to make it a lot of fun because today I'm actually hanging out with my girlfriend, Anna Manukyan. So, after more than 2 decades of education as an executive in the beauty industry, Anna saw the immense need for simplified financial education in our industry. Anna Manukyan is a certified financial educator, founder of Beauty Finance Group, and a leader in the industry. Her mission is to create industry transformation through accessible, stylist focused financial education. And I'm really happy to share some of these tips today because Anna is a wealth of knowledge. But that said, welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ambrosia. I'm so excited to be here with you all.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you. And I'm also excited for you to just pass on some of your knowledge because you have been on the other side of the industry as a leader. And I've gotten to know you through the years. I met you, through the world of education. So I'm excited to hear on your end just kind of how this came about. Like, tell us a little bit more about Beauty Finance Group and how it got started.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I've been on the executive side of education for working with thousands of salons and hairdressers across the country for the better part of 2 decades. And one of the things that we, as an industry do incredibly well is we train our stylists of how to elevate their skill set. We do amazing haircuts, colors, making sure the clients are happy. And one of the things that I kept seeing over and over again is there's not accessible financial education to actually understand, okay, great, I work really hard for my money. We talk about working smarter and not harder, but the reality is that there's very little information or accessible education for beauty professionals that really teach us, how do I make sure that my money's working for me? And, over 2 decades, there's been so many just completely heartbreaking stories where I've seen stylists and salon owners go from the absolute, highest of their career to literally winding up with nothing at the end. And, I always say we're an industry that takes care of other people, and it's really time that we started taking care of ourselves. So when I looked at really, how do I take my 2 decades of industry knowledge, of understanding, what it takes to be a successful stylist and to be a successful salon owner, and how do we help evolve our industry so that the next time there's, a pandemic, so that the next time life happens to us, that we're prepared, so that we're not seeing jokes on Facebook about, stylists working until the lunch of their, of the day of their funeral because we never have a chance to retire. It really is an opportunity for us to change the futures, the not only the future of the industry stylist now, but change the generational course of what it means to be a successful stylist from start to finish, so that when we look at retirement, it's not an old party joke, that we actually have a chance to be successful throughout our life, not just throughout the time that we're working behind the chair. So with that, I really started diving into the world of finance and understanding, what specifically around the world of finance is beneficial for stylists to know. We don't plan for things like inflation. We don't plan for things like physical decline. We don't plan for things like client attrition. And so when we look at a 30-year career, there's things that we know are going to happen. And we're so busy a lot of times taking care of each guest, trying to come in early, trying to stay in late, make ends meet, deal with the many multifaceted things that we need to do to run our business, that a lot of times the last thing we think about is our personal finances. And, one of the jokes that, I always ask people, anybody that I work with, to completely just take out of their mind is, when you ask most stylists about numbers or finance, the kind of number one response is, well, I didn't go to math. I didn't go to school to be a mathematician. I hate math. And the reality is that what we do behind the chair is actually really complicated. You have to be highly intelligent, not only from a traditional standpoint of intelligence, of formulating, of managing your books, of running a business. Stylists also have a very high emotional intelligence. And so anybody that's listening to this, if you take nothing else away from today, is I ask you to be kinder to yourself, in that you are much better with numbers. You're much better with understanding how things work than you've ever given yourself credit for. So don't ever, ever, ever say you're not good at math. And the reality is that so much of us are so intimidated by that side of things that we don't make decisions that are in our best interest. and we let other people make those decisions for us. And when we don't know what we don't know, we don't have an opportunity to take actions that benefit us in the long run. So I'm really hoping to change that. And with the work that we've been doing in the last 18 months, it's already led to some really incredible stories of transformation. So I think the future is bright.
And you hit the nail on the head, though, Anna. I really think you did when you said that we spend so much time taking care of others that we need to start taking care of ourselves. And part of doing that is planning for our financial future. And it doesn't have to be something scary, intimidating, or one of those things that is like this looming oversight in our lives. But speaking of oversights, I am kind of curious, like, what do you see the most common, I guess, mistake or oversight that you see happening in our industry right now?
We look at it from a day to day, week to week, month to month standpoint. And the three things that really I just mentioned it a little bit earlier is we don't plan for inflation and we don't plan for a physical decline. And so to your point, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. This is one of the few industries that the longer you're in it, the less money you tend to make. And that's a really sad reality. So what we tend to do is we, build and build and build and work ourselves up to be where we want to be that busy stylist, that successful salon owner for 5 to 7 years. We hit our peak and then we plateau. And we don't have those conversations on a consistent basis of keeping up with the cost of living, of raising our prices, of making sure that we're financially continue to keep up with where the world is going. And so year after year, we tend to make less and less money. And so I think looking at it from detaching the emotional side of the connection to our stylist and looking at it as what is it that I need to be successful? Do I need to raise my prices 5% every year just to make the same that I was making the year before? How do we look at what's going on in the grander scheme of things so that we can make sure that we're taking care of ourselves? Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to be, nobody's going to do those things for us unless we do it for ourselves. The other thing too, Ambrosia, is, one of my favorite books, and it's a very simple and a very easy read, is The Richest Man in Babylon. And, you hear a lot about, paying yourself first, paying yourself first, paying yourself first. Okay, that seems to be, it's like, okay, great. How do I pay myself first? And I think one of my favorite quotes is, a part of all I earn is mine to keep. And so, how simple is that? If you look at how much money is coming into you on a daily basis from your clients, from any of the services that you're making, think changing the mindset of a part of this is mine to keep. Everybody else will get taken care of. What is it that I need to keep for myself? And when we start to look at, making sure that we are setting money aside versus, paying everyone else first, and then do we look at, okay, great, now that I have this money, how do I make sure that I'm protected if I can't work? How do I make sure that I'm saving for my retirement? How do I make sure that I'm getting, out of debt, or that I'm not getting into debt? We lived through a pandemic, as we all know, and the challenge, with that is so many people, it literally pushed to the brink of poverty almost. And the reality is when you look at, being not being able to have income for 6 or 8 months, it's terrifying. But when you start to look at retirement, and when you start to look at that being, 8 years, 18 years, 20 years, it creates a whole different need of urgency of really looking at our finances right now. And, we also say one of the things that, a lot of times, right, is time is money. Time is money. And a lot of times when you say that to, when we talk about that as stylists, time is money takes on a meaning of, well, no, I need to charge for my time. But when you start to think about finances, time is money takes on a whole different meaning. The longer you can invest, the more seeds you can plant. If you haven't started, the earlier that you start, the better off you are. So if you're listening to this and you happen to be in beauty school, oh my God, congratulations. What we wouldn't give, to go back 20 years ourselves.
Amen to that. Yes.
Right? If you're listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, no, I've actually, I've got 10 years left to go. It's one of those things where yesterday would have been better than today, but today is much better than tomorrow. So start saving and start investing as early and as soon as you possibly can. In small amounts today will make a much bigger impact over time than larger amounts later. Don't wait for that perfect paycheck. Do not wait for that perfect job. Do not wait for that perfect scenario. Because guess what, guys? Life only gets busier and life only gets more complicated. So start as soon as you can.
Isn't that the truth? Holy cow. Yes, life does get busier. And I like that you're just thinking about planning beyond that peak. I like how you kind of worded it because I think it's one of those things where we're like working up to something. And then how do we know when we've actually plateaued and we've hit that peak and now we're starting that decline until we look back at it? And then when you start looking back at it, you've already started that. You've already ascended. You've already started to, you should be in that process of thinking about it. And so, in that, if you start thinking about it when you start going declining, then you're kind of behind in a way, right? So, but it's not, I love that you're wording it in a way that you're like, it's never too late to start. Today is better than tomorrow. Because I think sometimes we can beat ourselves up like, oh, too late now. Can't start. Just have to work for the rest of my life.
No, there's always solutions. And again, I think the overwhelming part with financial planning is exactly like, where the heck do I start? How do I do this? Because, and it's one of those things. So it's like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do you climb Mount Everest? One small step at a time. And so it's realistically looking at, what are your goals short term? What are your goals long term? If you're trying to buy a house in the next 2 years, I wouldn't take every single penny you have and lock it up into an account that you're going to let it need to sit there for 20 years, right? It's important to be realistic. Everything that you spend has to work for you. So looking at even getting into a practice on a daily basis of tracking where your money's going. And I know that sounds like a simple thing, but the reality is we live in a very retail focused, capitalist driven society. And regardless of what your viewpoints on that are, it's really easy to get caught up in bleeding money where we don't even realize it. And when you start to look at, the importance of staying out of debt and how debt works against us and really how much money we are giving away so freely on a daily, weekly, monthly, annually basis. And if we were to take even a small percentage of that and make that money work for us, of what that would look like in a 10, 15, 20-year time. One of the things is, and I'm never one to say like, oh, don't have your morning coffee. Like, listen, it is a need for stylists. It's a common,
Oh, it's a need for me.
it is a need. So it's not about giving up your morning Starbucks, but it is about, if you were to be mindful with, even setting aside like, $6 a day, right? So here's a fun fact: $6.60 a day over 30 years is almost $500,000.
Dang. That's a lot of coffee.
It is a lot of coffee, but the thing is, as stylists, right? What's an average tube of color? It's about $7. What's an average, add-on purchase of something you don't need? Average add-on purchases range about $10. And so when we look at understanding like, what part of this that I'm spending is mine to keep? And how do I invest, or where do I put that little nest egg that I have so that it continues to grow? Where do I plant my little acorns so that I have a beautiful oak tree at the end of when I need to rest under it? Like, that starts once we start to change our relationship with the income that we so readily sometimes have coming in, and really looking at, okay, which one of this, like, think of yourself as a little squirrel hoarding acorns, like which one of this is going to be mine, so that when it's time in 15 years and 10 years and 20 years, I can really enjoy the fruits of my labor. And most of us aren't taught to think that way. you know um I always say, the so much of the industry comes from working blue collar, really service oriented generational parents and everything else. I mean, we came here as refugees when I was 9 years old with literally $20 in a suitcase. That was my parents' story. And you know, my parents taught me to work really hard. It's, you show up early, there's an incredible work ethic and all of those things. But my mother's idea of retirement was to buy a funeral plot so that I wouldn't be in debt paying for her funeral services when she passes. And so we don't have the luxury of generational wealth. And so if you're listening to this also and you're like, oh my God, I wish I knew this 20 years ago, or I wish my parents taught me this. What so much of us have in common is that none of us taught us this. And so I think it's also time to change the conversation and take away the shame of not knowing, because that shame that we feel of, oh, I wish I would have known better, oh, I should have known this, is what also keeps us in the dark and what keeps us from evolving. And so, financial literacy is a crisis in this country, regardless of what industry that we're in. It truly, truly is. And so it's time to change that. And I think, we can not only change the course of our lives, but we can make some really fantastic changes for the generations to come as well.
You've already given up a couple of nuggets here. I love this, or acorns, I should say. But what would your like your top tips be for beauty professionals who are listening, just to get started? Like, what should we do to even get started with that journey?
So start today. Start today. What does it look like to start today? Because the reality is like, oh my gosh, I'll do it next year. We're almost at the end of another year. Years are flying as quick as months used to. So start today. What does it look like? It's looking at understanding where your finances currently are. If you know nothing else about, like, okay, it seems overwhelming to start tracking your purchases so you can understand your monthly budget. You can look at your fixed expenses and your income, and so you can start to look at how much can I put away on a monthly basis. To open a Roth IRA account, there's a maximum contribution of $6,000 a year. $6,000 a year, that's $500 a month. So $500 a month, what does that look like on a daily basis for you if you were to break that down, right? And there's lots of ways to open up, brokerage accounts. There's some ways that you can do it on, E-Trade on. I mean, you can do it literally yourself. You can contact me and I'm happy to set you up with a financial advisor that specializes in the beauty industry that can help you open up all of those accounts. The important thing, start as soon as you can. The second, I would really take the mindset of, again, a part of all I earn is mine to keep. Look at everything that's coming in and start to identify, if you were to put aside 10% of your daily income, what does that look like? If you were to look at 15 or 20% of your daily income, what would that look like? I think when we start talking about, $5,000, $6,000, those numbers can be intimidating. But when we look at, oh, that just means that means $27 a day. $10,000 a year is $27 a year, a day. That now starts to become a lot more attainable. The third thing is understand the fundamentals. I know that seems like, it might be an overwhelming thing, but knowledge truly is potential power. And the reason I say knowledge is potential power is once you start to accumulate knowledge, you can start to apply that knowledge. And then you start to really be a player in making the decisions for your own circumstances. One of the things that I do is there is a mastery course on finance that is a 6-week course that really teaches you how to understand those fundamentals. If you're not looking at education, there are some great books. I personally love, I said The Richest Man in Babylon is fantastic. It's a really clear book on just how the world of how money grows money, and it's told in a very storytelling way that is really, it's got some really great nuggets. Unshakable by Tony Robbins is another really good one. It's a little bit more of a read, but and if not, then by all means take a class and I'll walk you through all the fundamentals. For, I would say, you know, really looking at an emergency fund. And granted, there's a pandemic every 100 years. Hopefully, we've lived through ours and there's nothing else in our lifetime, but we're living through all sorts of historical events. And so, the importance of stashing away some money so that we know that the next time you can't work or the next time something happens, that we're not going further and further into debt. And, looking at really what are your short term goals and your long term goals. I think it's important to identify why financial planning is so important on an individual basis is, your goals and my goals may be very similar, or your goals and my goals may be very, very different. So there's not a one size fits all piece of advice. What is it that you want to accomplish in the next 2 years? And what is it that you want to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years? The reality is that, to be able to retire, the statistic is we need about 20 times our annual income. We're living a lot longer, especially for, so much of this industry being female. The average female in the United States lives until about 86 and a half. And so we're living longer lives. And man, you guys are just 2 years shorter than us. So really, the U.S. lifespan in general. Sorry, guys, the U.S. lifespan in general is becoming longer and longer. And so the reality is that And Social Security, by the way, is also supposed to run out by the time it hits 2035. And a lot of our industry, we also don't pay into Social Security. So we really start to have to look at, okay, how do I stash some money so that a part of mine is all I keep? Where can I plant that so that the seeds that I'm planting are being invested, so they are growing, so that they are compounding into a harvest that we can enjoy in the end. And then the last thing I would say is make sure that you are properly protected. So understanding the differences between, if something was to happen to you, we're in an industry that relies on our physical ability to make a living. So if something happens to your arm, if something happens to your leg, if something happens to, life happens, to make sure that you're not becoming destitute. So while you're healthy, also make sure you have proper protection, proper insurances put in place so that if something happens, it doesn't completely, crumble the foundation that you've been building for yourself.
Wow, all great tips. I actually, aside from just all the advice that you're giving on saving and just planting those seeds, uh, if we were in a process, like for those of us listeners here, what advice would you give to those who are in debt right now, or they're just trying to pay off their debt? Like, what's the easiest way to get ahead paying off debt?
Debt's a scary beast. And I kind of say, well, a little bit of a joke is of all the forward letter words, it's my least favorite, quite honestly. So when you look at debt, it's once we start to understand how debt works, debt is really set up to be a highly predatory machine. And so sometimes when you're in a lot of debt, you really feel like you're walking on quicksand. You step one step forward and it sucks you deeper in, and it sticks another step forward and it sucks you deeper in. Because, we'll talk about simple interest and compound interest in a second, because that's really important to understand. But remember, debt is highly, highly compounded. So your interest on debt is actually earning interest and it's sucking you in further. Okay. So when you see a statement that says you owe $1,500 and it's going to take you 7 years and you're going to wind up paying $6,000 if you just pay the minimum payment, and you're like, how does that math add up? It's because it's highly compounded. Think about this. The average bank, when you put your money in a even high yield savings account, is going to pay us about 0.5%. And that's considered high yield. Woohoo. 0.5%, right? The average credit card is between 19 to 25%. So that same bank is going to give you 0.5%, and they're going to charge you 25%. So it's set up to be very predatory. So to your question of, okay, great, how do we beat this beast? There are a couple of payoff methods that really work against compounding that interest. So you're able to have a strategy to pay it off, unless you're working with, a debt reduction agency or something like that, which is sometimes really can be detrimental to credit building. There are two methods that I absolutely, always recommend. The first one is the debt snowball method. And literally, I have an Excel program or Excel sheet that I can, if anybody's interested to this, I'm happy to share it with the listeners. There are programs online that can allow you to enter in up to 10 credit cards, where you're literally focusing on paying off the balances with the lowest interest off first, and you're collecting you're putting as big of a payment as you can on that lowest balance. And so typically, and then you pay that one off and you take any of the other savings that you would have been having to pay off, on that payment, and you're combining them and you're hitting the second lowest one. And then you're hitting the third lowest one. And so you're literally snowballing this debt payment method off. Sounds complicated. It's really easy when you see it done on paper. If you're snowballing your debt, that typically will save you a third of the time of paying it off versus trying to figure out, do I pay the highest interest? Do I just try to do a little bit more than the minimum payment on all of them? So debt snowball method would be my preferred choice. The other one is something that's called a debt avalanche method, where you're taking a similar approach, but you're paying off the highest interests off first. The idea is to concentrate all of your efforts, is to pay the minimums on everything else and to concentrate your efforts on one debt at a time, right? And so that seems sometimes counterintuitive, but both of those methods, because of the way that you're essentially tricking the compounding of that interest, you're able to save again about a third of the time. And sometimes, depending on your amounts, that equates thousands and thousands of dollars. And some usually again, depending on the on your personal situation, it's about, I've seen it save off as much as 3 years of paying off debt as well. So it's really powerful, even though it seems really simple.
Wow, a third of your debt. I mean, just to even think about that, it just even putting those two methods to practice and just like even thinking about the visual of that, what a great name for each one of those because it does. I mean, back when I had debt that I was paying off, I did the avalanche method, which I didn't even realize that was a thing. But it just puts a plan into action and it just makes you feel like empowered to be able to do this. And I think sometimes people don't realize the amount that they're paying into interest, or they just don't think about it because they're making minimum payments, and that debt just continues to build.
And what I would say about debt, my is let's take the shame out of it. In helping so many people deal with this, one of the top comments always is, I don't even want to deal with it. I just pay it because it's so scary to look at. And so the way that, again, it's a very, very predatory system. And I don't use that word lightly, because there is so much, just from, they're robbing you blind on one end. It's like they're, when you're looking at how much you're actually getting charged and what you versus, what you're being given on the back end, you're being robbed blind. But not only that, is that there's also so much shame set up around it of, oh my gosh, you're in debt? Oh, okay, you're in debt. And so what people do is they literally put their head in the sand and they're like, I don't even want to deal with it because it's so scary to look at, that we literally continue to go darker and darker and dark, deeper and deeper into this hole, into this quicksand of debt, because we don't want to look at it all at once. And so and so again, I ask you is, just look at it for what it is. Take the shame out of it. The average person in the United States, the average individual has about $6,600 of debt. And that's an average. So you might have more, you might have less, but this isn't an issue that just you is battling. If you're out of debt, congratulations. I know what it takes to get there. So fantastic. If it's something you're struggling with, there is help. And when you start to look at it clearly, and when you let light shine in on it and really have a plan, there is an absolute strategy to get out of it, and we can help you with that.
Okay, speaking of debt, you did mention earlier the differences between that you were going to talk about the difference between regular and compound interest. And I think you explain it so beautifully. So I'd love for you to share this with our listeners right now. What are the two differences between those types of interest?
Absolutely. So important to know. And thank you for bringing that up, Ambrosia. So, simple interest, let's just say you're going to, regardless of how long you're investing money, you're always going to get paid the same amount on the original premium that you invested. So, let's say we have the example of $10,000. Let's say you have $10,000 at a 4% return. That's about $400 a year. And you might think, woohoo, I'm getting $400 a year. So year one, you're going to get $400. Fantastic. Year two, you're going to get another $400. Year three, you're going to get another $400. And you're happy getting your $400 a year. Meanwhile, your money's tied up there for, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years. You're still getting $400 a year, because simple interest will always pay you on that initial $10,000. Let's talk about, how do the rich get so much richer, and how does money grow money? When it compounds. So, compound interest, again, let's use the same example of $10,000. Year one, it's 4%. So, I'm going to get $10,400. Year two, I'm going to grow 4% on $10,400. So, I already have $10,800. Year three, I'm going to grow 4% on $10,800. So, guess what? I have about $11,200. So my money grows for me a lot quicker. Money will grow money when it's compounded. So if you look at, an example of a 30-year of two friends, let's say you and I both invested $10,000. You had the right decision made by investing in something that compounded, and mine, I invested in something that was just simple interest. We both got a 4% return. In 30 years time, I would have doubled my money and had $20,000. If you were compounding in 30 years time, you would have actually tripled your money and had $30,000. So when you look at, the strategy that Warren Buffett uses, right? I think we all know the name Warren Buffett, right? One of the greatest, financial successes of our time. His one of his strategies is compound money for a long time and go with safer investments. So the other, kind of the other rule of money is, and again referring back to Warren Buffett, is rule number 1, don't ever lose money. Rule number 2 of money, always refer to rule number 1. And so I know one of the things we talk about is, you know, where do I put my money? We hear a lot about Bitcoin. We hear a lot about the stock market. We hear a lot about these like really exciting and sexy investments. I know you said finances weren't sexy earlier, and I tend to disagree a little tiny bit. But when we look at investments, it's also understanding what is it that you want. If you want, something really exciting and to be able to make a lot of money, the stock market can be absolutely your jam. But guess what? You can also lose everything. So understanding things like index strategy, like what are investments that are going to give you long-term growth, so that if you are planning for for your retirement and you have 15, 10, 20 years, what is going to give you growth, what is going to give you safety, what is going to meet your needs for the intention that you have for that money. And so once you start to kind of look at what do some of these things mean for me, you can be empowered to ask better questions, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who knows how to ask the right questions. And so that's the power for me of education is, what questions do we need to ask so we can start to get some of the answers that we really need to have for ourselves.
All beautiful advice, Anna. Thank you so much. And the compound interest. We need to compound our lives, everyone. Let's get compounded.
Always compound, always compound. And we with the other thing, when you look at things like, because the other questions, Ambrosia, is okay, great. So where does my money compound? Where does my money not compound? Chances are, if you're putting your money in like a really secure bond, right? Because there's also things like bonds. If you're putting your things in bonds, that money a lot of times will not be compounding. You will be getting simple interest. If you're investing your money in a Roth IRA or mutual funds, those accounts will compound. So it's also asking whoever is helping you is, just to be sure, will this compound year over year? And they'll say yes, or they'll say, no, actually, this investment type doesn't compound. And then you can say, great, can I move my money somewhere else where it does? So again, you don't have to know everything, but you have to understand some of the basics so that you can be the one making the decisions for yourself that will benefit you, because no one takes care of you the way you take care of you.
No one takes care of you the way you take care of you guys. Anna said it. You got to listen to those words. Man, this is fantastic advice. And thank you so much. I mean, just you're offering all this wealth of knowledge for free. And I know that you've got programs set up. So, where can everyone go to find more about what's coming next and learn more from you?
We have a lot more financial education coming your way. 2022 is going to be a really exciting year. There's a lot of really fantastic things coming. What I can talk about at this point is the fact that we are going to continue to offer finance mastery courses. It's a 6 weeks course, and it will tell you all about what you need to know for your personal finance journey. It's very interactive, and so if the time is right to take control of your personal finances, I hope to see you there. You can find more info at beauty.finance, which is a class website, or you can follow me on a Manukyan or Beauty Finance Group on any of the social platforms. And just DM me or send me a text. And we want to make sure that anything that we're doing is personal and customized for your financial needs.
And also, to make things easy for you guys, I'm going to go ahead and place all that in the show notes below. So just go ahead and click on that and you can get all that information right there. Anna, thank you so much for hanging out with us, and I really appreciate it. Also, everyone, next week we are going to be talking about preparing for the holidays for your business. So Drea and I are going to get down and dirty and all the little tricks that we do for holiday time for our clients to make things easier. But in the meantime, thank you so much for giving us your time and attention. It's very important to us. And we hope that you get as much value out of it as what we bring to you. And we want to thank you again. Bye.